I do have a disagreement. I think that they've been pretty mild. Jerry Falwell just the other day at the National Religious Broadcast, Jim Dobson at the National Religious Broadcaster, asked the question, why are there no successors to James Kennedy and Jerry Falwell and all these others, and he lamented it. My response is generally, thank God. I was talking with Tim Keller, one of these rising generation of evangelical leaders 2 days ago. And he's visiting on campuses, 14 campuses, with about a new book which presents his apologetics for the Christian gospel. And I asked him what the biggest obstacle that he faces in general question. And he said there were a couple, but among those obstacles was the identification of the Christian message with the anger and narrowness of the religious right. Then you question where your loyalties come in, and my loyalties are first to my beliefs, not to a movement that I think is exhausted in many ways. I think we are seeing a head-snapping generational change in American evangelicalism, and not just Rick Warren, somebody I really respect and work with on the AIDS disease, but also people like Gary Houghton, the head of International Justice Mission, where they do, this is a really evangelical parachurch organization with a rising profile that's not focused on political issues, but on issues of sexual slavery, women's rights in the developing world. Or Tim Keller, who has 5,000 attenders in New York, the first congregation that he recently, was telling me that he had in his pews somebody that was a Republican speechwriter sitting very near someone who was a songwriter for Madonna, and the one that was like a virgin. I think that's a real shift in particularly urban evangelicalism in the way that it approaches these things. I wouldn't minimize the fact, though, looking back to give them some due, that the religious right played an important historical role. It brought many conservative Christians out of a cultural isolation that followed the fundamentalist modernist controversy. Re-engaged them in public life as citizens, and built ties, particularly to Roman Catholics, which you mentioned, that had never existed in American history before. I remember the first, early pro-life marches where you would see, people on buses from Liberty University marching beside Knights of Columbus people with statues of the Virgin Mary. And that is a very different thing than most of American political history, where evangelicals and Catholics had a deep division. So I think there are some contributions there. But I do think there's a shift. I don't think it's a shift for simplistic reasons, because people are upset with the faith-based initiative, or they're upset with the Republican Party in a certain way. At least from my perspective, I think you're seeing a recovery of evangelical history is quite important. Evangelicalism was one of, if not the main source of social reform, kind of the main social reform in the 19th century. And it is absolutely amazing in that community the amount of attention that has been given over the last few years to Wilberforce and abolitionism and a lot of other reforms. That's a sign that people are looking for a form of political engagement that they'd be proud of, and they're looking for historical models that are different from the ones that they've seen. I think another factor that you're seeing is the shift of the center of gravity of world Christianity to the global south, which is, you now, really the figures are pretty familiar by now, but you now have more evangelicals in Brazil and Nigeria together than there are in the United States. And over 1.5 million American Christians now do short-term mission projects every year, and they see these global issues, particularly issues of poverty and disease, from the perspective of brothers in other countries, brothers and sisters in other countries. And so I found, when I was at the White House in one of the most visited periods in modern political history, that I found it quite easy to work with secular liberals, traditionally liberal human rights advocates, on a range of issues that had to do with Sudan and malaria and AIDS and sexual trafficking and a lot of other things. That there was a natural constituency of conscience that had developed on some of those issues. I think it's fair to say that this emerging evangelicalism, it's not going to be libertarian. I mean, that's just a fact, or kind of certain forms of anti-government conservatism. I've been having this argument and get blowback on it, but the reality here is that some conservatives view social justice as the impartial application of rules, rule of law, and markets. The Christian tradition, as developed in every form, Catholic and Protestant, has been that the justice of a society is judged by the treatment of the helpless and weak. And that is a fundamental ideological difference that I think conditions many of these debates and makes a lot of people feel homeless in the context of a narrow anti-government conservatism. But I would say on the other side, and I think Tim would agree with this, and Rick Warren would probably agree with this, that biblically and theologically conservative Christians remain morally conservative. That, as you mentioned, that the rising generations of younger evangelicals tend to be more pro-life than the previous generation, and they view it as a social justice. I feel like, and I don't want to over-characterize this because I like Jim Wallis and I know him well, but I feel like the religious left often repeats every mistake of the religious right in just an entirely different ideology. And so you read an editorial from Sojourners about, a minor budget cut in a bloated program, and it's like we've redone the crucifixion. The problem here is that both sides have baptized somebody else's agenda instead of being an authentic witness and voice of their own. So I think that once this tendency becomes a movement, it's likely to be a center-right movement in America, a kind of social justice conservatism. I think it's likely to believe in markets, but will also believe that government should be active abroad and at home in defending the weak and helpless. And my concern about the Democratic Party and liberal ideology is I'm not sure that they have the ideological tools to effectively appeal to them. Because of the almost complete triumph in democratic and liberal political discourse of absolute human autonomy and rights as a substitute for anything having to do with the rights of the weak and helpless, particularly on pro-life issues. I would be very attracted to a Governor Casey Democratic Party. Okay? That would be a genuine outreach. Okay? Social justice Democrat who is open to to pro-life views, moral convictions, everything. We're not getting a Governor Casey Democratic Party with Obama and Hillary Clinton. We're getting a more sophisticated religious language as it relates to these things. But I don't think these basic welcoming of the role of religion in our common life and openness to pro-life conviction as a matter of social justice. I don't see much of that in the Democratic Party. And that's what I think it would really take to do the political reorientation that would allow Democrats to take advantage of this important social shift.